In 1893, British archaeologist Theophilus Pinches was cataloguing clay tablets in the basement of the British Museum when he came across one that had been incorrectly labeled for 32 years. Its label contained only a brief description, religious text. Untranslated. But when Pinches began reading the cuneiform inscriptions for himself, his hands reportedly started to tremble. Later that evening, he recorded a disturbing observation in his private journal. "This is neither a prayer, nor a hymn, nor a myth. It is an instruction manual, and it was written for those who are dying." The tablet was catalogued as K. 2486. It had originally been recovered from the library of Ashurbanipal in the ancient city of Nineveh. However, the text itself appeared to be considerably older. Its language and structure were Sumerian, with origins allegedly reaching back to at least 4000 BCE. And what the tablet described was not an afterlife in the traditional sense. It was something far more unsettling. The text spoke of a brief and precisely defined interval, a place or state that exists somewhere between a person's final breath and whatever follows death. Across 12 numbered passages, the Sumerians reportedly documented exactly what they believed awaited every human being within that mysterious threshold. They described whom you would encounter, what those beings would offer you, and the decision you would ultimately be forced to make. Today, we are going to examine and decode all 12 passages. By the end of this video, you will understand why this tablet was quietly removed from public display on 3 separate occasions. The most recent removal reportedly occurred in 2019. You will also learn why the last person permitted to examine it was a physicist rather than an archaeologist. According to this ancient civilization, a people who observed the heavens with extraordinary precision, you will be asked 3 questions at the moment of your death. We are going to uncover what those questions supposedly are. More importantly, you will see why a text allegedly written around 4000 BCE appears to resemble, almost word for word, the experiences modern near-death researchers are documenting in hospital rooms today. This will not be a comfortable video. I want to make that perfectly clear before we begin. Some of what you are about to hear directly challenges nearly every modern idea about death that most of us were raised to accept. It conflicts with the Christian understanding of death. It also contradicts the atheist interpretation. And it differs from many of the comforting ideas promoted in self-help books, the so-called bardo, the tunnel of light, or the joyful reunion with deceased loved ones. What the Sumerians described was much colder than any of those beliefs. It was rigid, organized, and almost procedural. According to the tablet, this process does not care what you believe, which religion you follow, or how carefully you have prepared for death. Even more disturbingly, the text suggests that something connected to this process has already begun to open. Not in the distant future. It is supposedly happening right now, during the years in which we are currently living. So, if you are ready, we are going to move through the tablet slowly, examining one code at a time. There are 12 codes in total. And by the time we reach the final one, you will possess something very few people around you have ever encountered. A map. It is said to be a 4,000-year-old map of the experience every human being must eventually face, written by a people who claimed that visitors from the sky had shown it to them. Before we examine the tablet itself, we need to spend a moment discussing the man who first translated it, because his story is an important part of this mystery. Theophilus Pinches never publicly released his findings concerning K. 2486. In fact, the surviving account suggests that he deliberately suppressed them. In a letter sent to a colleague at Oxford in November 1894, Pinches explained that he had decided the tablet was of a nature that would not serve the public good if widely circulated. He then sealed his translation notes inside a private collection. Those documents remained hidden until 1971. That year, a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania was examining a collection of estate papers that had been donated to the university. Among those papers, she reportedly discovered Pinches' complete translation inside a sealed envelope bearing only 2 words. For the assembly. The student later published the translation anonymously in a small academic journal. Only 2 issues of that journal were ever released before the publication was shut down. It was known as the Threshold Review. Today, both surviving issues are exceptionally difficult to locate. Within months of publication, the institution responsible for printing the journal reportedly recalled most of the available copies. The translation we are about to examine has been reconstructed from one of the few copies believed to have survived. It was then compared with photographs of the original cuneiform inscriptions made available through the British Museum's digital archive. However, there is one additional piece of context you need to understand before we begin, and it is the detail almost everyone leaves out. The tablet was not composed in the ordinary written language used by the Sumerians in their daily lives. Instead, it was allegedly written in what scholars describe as ceremonial cuneiform. This specialized script was supposedly reserved for documents considered too important to risk being misunderstood, too dangerous to be copied casually, and too sacred to be placed on public display. Of the approximately 500,000 Sumerian tablets recovered so far, fewer than 200 are said to use this ceremonial form of writing. Most surviving examples contain royal proclamations or official temple records. K. 2486 is reportedly one of only 7 tablets categorized as procedural instructions. In other words, these texts provide step-by-step directions for something the Sumerians believed every person would eventually be required to do. And among those 7 tablets, K. 2486 is said to be the only one that deals specifically with the moment of death. Before we move any further, however, I need to pause for a moment. What comes next becomes considerably darker. I realized some time ago that several parts of this mystery simply cannot be explained properly within the limits of a single video. For that reason, I placed the complete interpretation of all 12 codes into a separate written document. It includes the relevant tablet numbers, the translated passages, and the precise astronomical date allegedly recorded in the text, calculated down to the individual degree. You can find that document through the link below, and a QR code is currently displayed on the screen. Now, let us continue. To understand what K. 2486 is actually claiming, we first need to understand the civilization said to have written it. The Sumerians were anything but primitive. They possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge, including an awareness of the precession of the equinoxes, a gradual celestial cycle that takes approximately 26,000 years to complete. They also recorded what some interpret as the orbital paths of planets that could not have been observed with the unaided human eye. They wrote about Uranus and Neptune thousands of years before the invention of the telescope. And they repeatedly claimed that this advanced knowledge had been given to them by beings they called the Anunnaki. According to Sumerian accounts, these beings descended from the sky. The texts also suggest that the Anunnaki did not experience death in the same way human beings did. And there was supposedly a reason for that. They understood the protocol. The word protocol is the closest English equivalent to the Sumerian expression written at the beginning of tablet K. 2486. The complete phrase is Gao, Ja, Zu, Mush, De, Lam. Most scholars have interpreted it as, the great knowledge at the threshold. However, according to unpublished notes attributed to linguist Samuel Noah Kramer in 1962, a more precise translation would be the procedure for the door. The door. That was how the Sumerians described the moment of death. They did not consider death to be an ending. They saw it as a doorway. And according to the tablet's first passage, you will not be alone when you cross its threshold. The first code can be translated as follows. When the breath has departed, but the silver cord remains unbroken, 3 figures will approach. They will carry the faces of those you once trusted. They will speak using the voices of those you loved. When they call to you, do not answer with your name. The silver cord. A similar phrase also appears in the Bible, in Ecclesiastes, chapter 12, verse 6. But the Sumerian text allegedly used this imagery approximately 2,500 years earlier. The Sumerians believed that when clinical death occurs, a connection between the physical body and conscious awareness remains intact for a limited and measurable period. Interestingly, modern investigations into near-death experiences have produced accounts that appear to resemble this ancient description. Dr. Sam Parnia has documented reports from resuscitated patients who claimed to remain consciously aware for several minutes after their hearts had stopped beating. The Sumerians reportedly referred to this brief interval as the silver minutes. And during those minutes, they warned that something would approach you. Not one figure. 3. According to the tablet, there are always 3. The second code goes into greater detail about who, or what, those figures might be. The passage can be rendered this way. They are the ones who existed before the flood. They no longer possess bodies, but they still remember what it meant to have one. They hunger for physical form. And they will offer you the opportunity to return. The Sumerians apparently believed that the presence waiting at the threshold of death was neither a god nor an angel. Instead, they described it as a former occupant of human consciousness. These beings had supposedly lived in physical bodies just as we do now. But they lost those bodies during a catastrophic event mentioned 14 separate times throughout Sumerian literature. We know that event by a much more familiar name. The Flood. It is the same great disaster described in the Epic of Gilgamesh. A remarkably similar flood also appears in the Book of Genesis. According to this interpretation of the Sumerian story, the catastrophe left behind an entire class of disembodied consciousnesses. And ever since losing their physical forms, those entities have been searching for a way back inside. Tablet K. 2486 claims that they are given their opportunity during one very specific moment. The instant a human being dies. The third code explains how this process supposedly works. When you arrive before the door, the field will appear. Within the field, you will see everything you have ever desired. It will reveal the face of the person you lost. It will show you the body and the life you once wished were yours. But understand this clearly. The field is bait. The Sumerian word reportedly used in this passage is shushuga. Its literal meaning is said to be, the hook inside the fish's mouth. What the tablet describes is essentially a psychological lure. At the moment of death, your consciousness supposedly enters what the Sumerians called the field. This is a perceptual space where your deepest desires and most painful unfulfilled wishes appear in vivid, convincing detail. You might see your deceased mother. You might encounter the child you lost. Perhaps you would see the lover who left you, or the version of yourself you always wanted to become but never did. The tablet issues a direct warning. None of it is real. Everything you witness within the field has been deliberately constructed. And according to the text, the illusion is created by the same beings described in the second code, the disembodied entities searching for a way back into physical existence. If you accept what the field presents, reach toward it, or willingly say yes, you enter into an agreement. No spoken promise is required. The desire itself becomes your consent. That is how the contract is sealed, not through words, but through wanting. The fourth code reveals the nature of that contract. To accept what the field provides is to surrender what the field demands. The price of the bargain is the body. More precisely, it is the body that will come next. You will return to the physical world, but the one who returns will no longer be entirely you. At this point, the tablet's description stops feeling mystical and begins to sound almost mechanical. The Sumerians appear to be outlining a process of consciousness substitution. If you accept the offer presented at the threshold, you are supposedly returned to an embodied life. But the consciousness entering that new body is no longer exclusively your own. It becomes a combination of two separate presences. Part of what returns is the original you. The other part is one of those disembodied beings. It comes back with you, attached to your consciousness like a hidden passenger. And over the course of an entire human lifetime, your original identity is gradually overridden. The tone of the tablet changes dramatically in the fifth code. It no longer concentrates on describing what awaits you. Instead, it begins explaining how the offer can be refused. The passage reads: "Do not speak your name. Do not turn your eyes toward the face. Move through the field without accepting anything it presents. Past the field stands a second door. Beyond that second door, freedom awaits. When the figures call your name, you must not respond. You must not look directly into the faces the field places before you. You must not reach for anything, regardless of how familiar, beautiful, or comforting it appears. You simply have to keep moving forward." What the Sumerians describe is essentially a gauntlet. The field is a test. And that test determines whether your awareness can recognize manipulation at the very moment your physical life ends. The sixth code reveals what supposedly waits beyond this trial. And this is the point where, according to the story, many modern scholars have refused to publish their complete translations. The reason is that the sixth code does not fit neatly into any familiar religious tradition. It does not resemble the Christian concept of heaven. It does not align with the Buddhist understanding of the bardo. And it does not correspond to the journey described in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The passage begins: "Beyond the second door stands the assembly. There, the assembly will ask you 3 questions. Your answers will determine whether you ascend or are returned. There is no third path." The Sumerians allegedly portrayed this assembly on dozens of cylinder seals. The images show a semicircle of identical, faceless figures seated around a single vacant chair. That empty seat is reserved for the consciousness that has just arrived. It is waiting for you. The seventh code reveals the first question. What did you take that was never given to you? That is the complete question. There is no additional context and no explanation to help you interpret it. However, the Sumerian commentary associated with this passage makes it clear that the question is not simply about theft in the ordinary sense. It refers to something much broader. It asks about the energy you took from other people without their consent. It includes the attention you constantly demanded and the love you willingly received without offering anything in return. It concerns every lifetime in which you behaved primarily as a taker rather than a giver. The assembly already knows the answer. What it wants to discover is whether you know it too. The eighth code presents the second question. What did you give that was never asked of you? This question is the inverse of the first, but the tablet treats it with equal seriousness. The Sumerians believed that interfering with another consciousness's journey without being invited could, in certain circumstances, be even worse than taking something from that person. This could mean forcing your affection upon someone who did not want it. It could mean imposing your beliefs on a child. Or it could mean demanding that a partner accept your version of reality even though they understood the world differently. The Sumerians reportedly had a word for this. Nambizu. It can be translated approximately as, the imposed shape. Within their cosmology, this represented a violation of one of the most fundamental laws. Every consciousness has ownership over its own becoming. Then we arrive at the ninth code. And this is the passage that, as I mentioned earlier, changes everything. The third and final question is: what did you know, yet fail to act upon? Take a moment and consider those words again. What truth did you recognize but choose not to act on? The Sumerians believed that the most serious form of moral failure was not necessarily causing harm yourself. It was seeing harm take place and choosing to remain silent. It was recognizing the truth while refusing to live according to it. It was being shown a path forward, only to turn away and embrace a comfortable lie instead. Tablet K, 2486 reportedly attaches a number to this failure. According to the text, approximately 7 out of every 10 consciousnesses fail when they are asked the third question. They do not fail the first question. They do not fail the second. They fail the third. That is because most people who reach the assembly are finally forced to confront all the things they knew were true during their lives but never had the courage to act upon. Before we continue to the next code, pause for just a moment. What you have just heard about the ninth code is the part that transforms the meaning of the entire tablet. But its full significance becomes much clearer when the translation is placed beside the original Sumerian notation. The number is there. So are the conditions that supposedly trigger the process. I have included all of that information in the written document linked below. Take 5 seconds to download it now, and then return to the video, because everything that follows builds directly upon this passage. The link is available in the description, and the QR code is currently displayed on your screen. The 10th code describes what happens to those who fail before the assembly. This is also the section that has reportedly been excluded from public-facing exhibitions of K-2486 since 2019. The passage reads: "Those who fail will not be punished. Instead, they will be returned. They will be placed once again inside the body of a child who has not yet taken its first breath. They will remember nothing. They will understand nothing. And they will repeat the cycle. This is reincarnation, but it is not presented as a reward. It is reincarnation as a corrective loop. If you cannot answer the assembly's 3 questions adequately, you are not condemned to hell. In this cosmology, hell does not exist. You are simply sent back to Earth. Your consciousness is placed inside a new infant, and you are given another lifetime to learn what you failed to understand during the previous one. But there is another detail, one that almost no one includes when quoting this section of the tablet. The Sumerians wrote that the same consciousness could move through this cycle dozens of times. Some might return hundreds of times. And according to the text, certain consciousnesses never escape the cycle at all. The accompanying commentary includes an even more disturbing warning. Each return supposedly becomes more difficult than the one before it. With every completed cycle, the consciousness grows increasingly attached to the field. The illusion becomes more persuasive, and the bait becomes harder to resist. The longer a consciousness remains trapped within the loop, the more difficult it becomes to break free. The 11th code explains what happens to those who successfully answer the 3 questions. Those who answer will rise. They will be taken into the upper chamber. They will receive a seat. From above, they will observe the field. And in time, they will become the ones who ask the questions. The implication is extraordinary, and most scholars have allegedly avoided addressing it directly. The Sumerians appear to be suggesting that the assembly itself, the semicircle of faceless judges, is composed of consciousnesses that once faced and passed the same test. Those who answer the 3 questions correctly are not rewarded with an eternal paradise. Instead, they are assigned a purpose. They become evaluators. They form the next assembly, questioning the consciousnesses that arrive after them. This is a recursive cosmology. The system continues operating by turning those who pass through it into its future administrators. Finally, we come to the 12th and last code. More than any other passage, this one suggests that the tablet's authors were not simply recording folklore. They appear to have written something they expected future generations to test and verify. The final passage reads: "On the day when the river of the sky crosses the bull, and the 7 sisters stand directly above the sacred city, the door will open more widely than ever before. Many will cross the threshold. And some will not be required to die before doing so." This appears to describe a specific astronomical configuration. The river of the sky refers to the Milky Way. The bull represents the constellation Taurus. The 7 sisters are the stars of the Pleiades cluster. And the sacred city is believed to be Eridu, one of the oldest known cities of ancient Sumer. The alignment described by the tablet, the Milky Way crossing Taurus while the Pleiades reach the zenith above a particular geographic location, is presented as a real and calculable astronomical event. According to two separate astrophysics papers referenced in the accompanying document, this precise alignment occurs only once every several thousand years. The latest occurrence reportedly began in late 2023. And according to those calculations, its most significant window will remain active throughout the next several years. Some will not need to die first. That is the exact claim made by the tablet. It suggests that during this unusual window, certain people will be capable of passing through the door while they are still physically alive. They will enter the field. They will stand before the assembly. They will face the same three questions. And afterward, they will return to their physical bodies carrying whatever they gained, or whatever they lost, during the encounter. The Sumerians never explained who these individuals would be. They said only that during this specific period, the barrier separating embodied life from the assembly would become unusually thin. It would weaken to such a degree that ordinary people, in completely ordinary moments, might suddenly discover themselves standing before the door. It could happen in a dream. It could occur during meditation. It might happen during an accident that should have killed them but, for reasons they cannot explain, did not. It could happen during a moment of overwhelming crisis. Or it might occur in a state of complete stillness. During this window, the Sumerians warned, death would no longer be the required price of admission. For 1,000 years before Christ, they supposedly recorded that our present era would fall within that window. They wrote down the date. They documented the necessary conditions. And in the tablet's final line, they left behind a warning. I will read it exactly as it has been translated. Prepare your answers now. The door does not wait. The door does not negotiate. The door has already begun to open. So, what are we supposed to do with this? How should we respond to a 4,000-year-old clay tablet that appears to describe near-death experiences with almost clinical precision? What do we make of a text that outlines a moral system more demanding than much of modern philosophy? How do we interpret a tablet that identifies a specific astronomical window, one that we are allegedly experiencing right now? And why has that same artifact reportedly been removed from public exhibition 3 separate times by institutions that have declined, in writing, to provide an explanation? You can dismiss the entire thing as mythology. That is the easiest answer. It is also the explanation most academics would probably offer, because proposing anything else from within a tenured university position could carry serious professional consequences. You could also call it a coincidence. Perhaps it is merely a coincidence that the Sumerians referred to the silver cord approximately 2,500 years before a similar image appeared in Ecclesiastes. Maybe it is coincidence that they described a brief period of conscious awareness after death thousands of years before modern researchers began documenting comparable reports. And perhaps it is also coincidence that they connected a precisely defined astronomical event to a spiritual occurrence, and that the astronomical calculations allegedly align. You are free to accept that explanation. Many people do. But before you dismiss it, there is something else you should know. K. 2486 is reportedly not the only tablet containing these instructions. At least 7 additional fragments are said to be held across 3 private collections and a university archive that remains closed to the public. Those fragments allegedly expand upon the same protocol. They come from different regions and use different languages, yet they contain strikingly similar directions. The same process. The same 3 questions. And the same warning about the door. There is one final detail. The most recent reported removal of K. 2486 from public exhibition occurred in 2019. Shortly before that removal, a request to examine the tablet was allegedly submitted by a researcher who was not an archaeologist. He was a physicist specializing in the quantum study of consciousness. In his written application, he stated that he wanted access to the artifact for what he called verification of a correspondence. That phrase has a very specific meaning within scientific research. It suggests that he believed the tablet contained information matching independent results produced by an entirely unrelated scientific discipline. The physicist was granted access to the artifact for a single afternoon. He never published his findings. 4 months later, he retired from his university position. His only known public statement about the tablet was reportedly made during a private conference and later leaked by someone in attendance. It consisted of a single sentence. The text is consistent with what the data suggests, and I will not be elaborating further. That is where the public trail ends. A working physicist with a serious academic reputation examined a 4,000-year-old Sumerian tablet. Then, using careful and deliberately restrained language, he stated that its contents were consistent with empirical findings in quantum consciousness research. After that, he walked away. He did not publish a paper. He did not promote a theory. He offered no public argument in its favor. He simply provided that cautious confirmation and removed himself from the discussion entirely. And now, you know what the tablet reportedly contained. You know the 12 codes. You know the 3 questions. You know the final warning. And you know about the astronomical window the text claims we have already entered. The Sumerians, whoever they truly were and wherever their knowledge came from, recorded these instructions for a reason. They intended to leave something behind. Somehow, they believed that thousands of years later, people like us would encounter these words and begin asking the question they wanted us to confront. It is the simplest question of all. None of the 12 codes asks it directly, yet every one of them is built around it. What will you say when they ask you? That is the real question. And ultimately, it may be the only question that matters. The field may be real, or it may not be. The assembly may exist, or it may not. The door itself may be real, or it may be nothing more than an ancient metaphor. But the 3 questions are undeniably real. What did you take that was never given to you? What did you give that was never requested? And what truth did you recognize but fail to act upon? At some point, something will ask you these questions. Perhaps it will happen at the moment of death. Perhaps it will happen before then. Or perhaps they are being asked right now by the part of you that already knows the answers. And here is the final detail I deliberately saved until the end. The Sumerians believed that the moment you begin seriously preparing your answers, the door begins responding to you differently. According to their account, the assembly is not your enemy. It is not waiting for an opportunity to condemn you. Its purpose is to discover who you truly are. And the consciousnesses that pass through the process most easily are not necessarily the most virtuous. They are not always the most educated, religious, or spiritually accomplished. They are simply the ones who arrive having already confronted the 3 questions during life. Not once, but repeatedly. And most importantly, honestly. Without hesitation. The consciousnesses that passed most easily were those who already knew, before death, exactly how they would respond. They knew because they had been answering those questions throughout their entire lives. Every day, through the quiet decisions they made when no one else was watching. The Sumerians had a phrase for this way of living. They called it, living toward the door. And ultimately, that is the true purpose of Tablet K, 2486. It is not meant to be a horror story. It is not a curse. It is an ancient warning system, supposedly left behind by people who wanted future generations to understand what was waiting for them. The questions themselves are simple. Answering them honestly is not. And the time to begin searching for those answers is not when the silver cord is already breaking. The time is now. While you still have a body. While you are still capable of making different choices. While the door is opening. According to the Sumerians, that process has already begun. The tablet says it. The physicist appears to have confirmed it. And the artifact that was reportedly hidden from public view 3 separate times continues to warn us about it. And now that you know the 3 questions, there is one final choice left to make. You can close this video and forget what you heard. Or you can share it with someone who may need to hear these questions before they reach the door. Because if the Sumerians were right, preparing yourself is only part of the responsibility. The other part is warning the people you care about while there is still time. So share this video. Send it to someone who is willing to look beyond the comfortable answers and ask what may be the most important questions of their life. The door does not wait. And perhaps this video reached you now for a reason.